So we had one in Bill.
Okay. Y'all, as we get ready to get started here, we have a couple of people that are going to be joining us. Apparently, Jeremy and Cheryl are on the same flight. It supposedly landed at 10:20 or was scheduled to land at 10:20. And maybe I'll segue to the last agenda item for just a second. One of the things we need to be sure and discuss before we leave today is timing of the meeting and what's the appropriate time to start. But we do have a quorum, and so we can get started. But just a brief reminder before we get started that this is being webcast, and so everything you say and do and all that kind of stuff will last in perpetuity on the internet. And also, yeah, exactly, will be held against you and all that kind of stuff. And if you would, mute any electronic devices, please. I thought I would share with you, I assume all of you either know or know of Marie Flickinger, and she chaired this council for the first 4 years, and she resigned from the council at the interim after the last meeting. And so if you look at agenda item number 2, we need to elect a new chair and chair-elect. But I actually called Marie this morning and told her it just didn't seem appropriate of starting the meeting without her, but she shared her best wishes and all that kind of stuff, and she assured me she would call me from time to time to check in, and so Marie's legacy is still here. But the commissioner and Dr. Gardner are not available today. They're normally with us, but we schedule these meetings months in advance, but then other scheduling conflicts arise. So ask Rex to do any opening comments or remarks.
So my temptation is just to say, well, opening remarks and let it go at that. But it's good to have you all here. There's a lot of new faces. I think that at least as a forum for getting some ideas from the institutions and having a chance to discuss some things that in a place with both presidents and trustees, in a way that there is no other forum for doing that quite often, certainly helps us and gives us a lot of insight into what's going on at the institutions and what y'all are thinking about certain issues, and that helps inform the decisions that we need to make. And so we very much appreciate the input. It often appears as though there's not much being done here sometimes, and so it's hard to point to like a concrete accomplishment of the group, but I think that the real value in it lies in the dialogue that gets to take place in the information sharing from what we're up to what y'all are up to, and how that can inform each other. So glad to have y'all here and welcome. And the commissioner decided to take some much needed time in California. That's where his daughter and 2 grandkids are at. And David Gardner had to be somewhere else today, or otherwise they both would surely have been here. So thanks again, and let's get going.
Rex Weaver from Central Texas College. I'd like to place a nomination, Ron Walker, my colleague from CCAT, to be the next chairman of the committee.
Okay. If you would, just 1 minute, please. I want to go let everybody introduce themselves, and then we'll get into item number 2, if we can, please, sir. But one last opening comment before we do introductions. The microphones, if you're speaking, turn the microphone off, and I know y'all know how to use microphones, but if we, the most important thing, or my point, is to turn the microphones off. If we leave them on, we get this nasty feedback loop that'll make us all run out of the room. But with that said, we're going to start to my right and let Mr. Cantini up first, and we'll just go all the way around the right.
Thank you. My name's Armin Cantini. I'm on the board of Galveston College and in my second 6-year term. And it's a real privilege to serve the community college system and to be stepping into this role in the footsteps of our friend and colleague, George Black. And if you'll bear with me for a moment, I'd appreciate the opportunity to say a few words about George. George was the epitome of a BOI. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, that's someone who was born on the island. And he wore proudly all of his adult life a diamond-studded BOI ring that always reminded him of his roots and his birthplace. He loved the island, he loved its people, and George will be most remembered for what he gave back to his birthplace and his community. Having grown up extremely poor, George recognized early on the importance of helping others help themselves to have a better life and to give back to his community as he was able. As a parent, George served as a scoutmaster for his son's Cub Scout and Boy Scout troops and did that all the way through his son Josh receiving his Eagle Scout badge. He was a Kiwanian and a president of that club. He was a 32nd degree Mason and a member of the Galveston Scottish Rite. He was involved in various city committees and committees at the University of Texas Medical Branch. One of his fun activities, for over 20 years, he was involved with Galveston Mardi Gras and was king of the crew of Gambrinus, and something he really enjoyed. A lot of people remember him for his involvement with First Lutheran Church, and to see George at Oktoberfest in his lederhosen was quite the sight for those of you who know George. And besides his commitment and dedication to his community, he always enjoyed and looked forward to traveling with his wife Sherry and to hunting and fishing excursions with his friends. He was an entrepreneur at heart. He was a proud Texas A&M University graduate. He was president of the company he founded, which was an information technology staffing firm. And George loved the island, and he had his island home, and he loved giving back to those less fortunate. He had a vision to see what was needed, what needed to be done, but he had the gift and the talent and the ability to make that vision a reality to those in need. And when George became aware that his health situation was something that was going to get away from him, he said, just let me go back to my beautiful island. I just want to be on my beautiful island with my beautiful wife, Sherry. And within about 10 days of that diagnosis, he was gone. And we all miss him. I'm proud to call him my friend. If it's the pleasure of this group, perhaps we could direct a letter be written to Sherry expressing our appreciation for his service on the Leadership Council. Thank you for that opportunity.
Very touching. Hi, my name is Ricardo Solis. I'm the president of Laredo Community College. I've been there for a little bit over a year now, so it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to working with this committee. Thank you.
My name is Ron Walker. I'm from Victoria College. I've been on the board for 32 years. I guess I was elected when I was 12. Anyway, I serve on the CAT board and strong believer in our mission. So I'm happy to be here, and thank you, Rex, for that. Maybe, I don't know, but anyway, I'm not campaigning for that by any stretch, but I appreciate the honor of somebody like Rex doing that.
Good morning. My name is Brenda Kays. I'm president of Kilgore College. I've been at Kilgore College for approximately 18 months now, but not new to Texas. I served at Vernon College for 23 years and worked in North Carolina, also at a couple of institutions, served as president 5 years at Stanley Community College. But it's great to be back in the great state of Texas, and I'm looking forward to working with each and every one of you on this committee.
Dan Mims, the Center College. Been on the board a little over 15 years. Was chair for 4 years, and currently I'm vice chair. Also serve on the Finance and Audit Committee at ACCT, and then in addition to my college service, I own a company in Houston. We warehouse third-party storage, refrigerated, frozen food products that we store for other folks. And then also, I'm a Rotarian and volunteer at the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeos, so stay busy.
Yeah, I'm still Rex Weaver, and I'm still from Central Texas College, and been on this since its initiation started. And my background is I'm a soldier, spent 43 years in service of the nation, and retired and own a small ranch in Killeen, and just kind of do what I want to do when I do it, you know. Enjoy life.
Good morning, William Surratt. I serve as president of El Paso Community College.
My name is Anita Shackelford, and I'm on the Board of Trustees at the Southwest Texas Junior College in Uvalde. I've served 10 years, just got my 10-year pin.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lonnie Howard. I am the president of Lamar Institute of Technology in the city of Beaumont, Texas, and I've been in that position now for a little over a year. Prior to that, I was the president of Clover Park Technical College in the state of Washington. I am not new to Texas, have previously worked at Houston Community College, U of H, and San Jack. At any rate, it is a privilege to be here. I'm delighted to be a part of this council.
K. Paul Holt, chair of the McLennan College Board of Trustees, joined the board in 1999, and became chair, I guess, about 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We're the new members. We're glad you're here today. You know, both during the meeting and after the meeting, if you have any questions, you know, during the meeting we can discuss them, whatever answers you need. But then after the meeting, if you have any questions, I encourage you to follow up with me, and I'll try to get you the answers as best I can. Now we'll move on to number 2, so that I can move out of this chair and we can have a new committee chair. And you can either be nominated or you can self-nominate. And of course, as I suggested in my email, those absent are still fair game to be nominated. When you're not here, you're still in play. But with that said, General, I'll kick it back to you, and you can formalize your nomination, please.
Well, I'll renew my nomination for Ron Walker.
And I guess I should say right now we're voting for the committee chair, and then we'll do the same process for the committee, the chair-elect. Any other nominations? So I guess we should call for a show of hands just to make it official. Oh, a second. Yeah, I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay. Now show of hands. Is there anybody opposed? Okay. We have a new chair, and I'll go ahead and do this part, Ron. We'll do a chair-elect, and then I'll let you move over here, and I will move there. But just so you'll know, I've got a script for you that will help you walk through the agenda today. Okay, with that, ask for nominations for chair-elect.
Mr. Tomlin, I'd like to nominate Mr. Mims as chair-elect.
Any other nominations? Oh, I'm sorry, second. Any other nominations? Okay. Hang on just one second. I can't write and talk at the same time, y'all. Okay, so we have a nomination for Mr. Mims and a second. All in favor, raise your hands. Anybody opposed? I guess if you're opposed, you get the job. But okay. With that said, we have a chair and a chair-elect. I'm going to ask Mr. Walker to move over here, and I'll move over there. And give us just 1 minute, and then we'll carry on with the agenda. I want to just kind of brief Mr. Walker for a second of the script I've got here.
With his nameplate.
Oh.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know if I'm more surprised or more honored, but hopefully this is, I believe, in a flat earth board, so everybody just pitch in and start talking. The next item is consideration of the minutes. I think the minutes were, a copy of the minutes were sent out in the packet. Does anyone have any corrections or any sort of discussions concerning the minutes?
I move that the minutes be adopted as written.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second to adopt the minutes as presented to the board. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, so passed. Next will be the discussion of the tasks that have been assigned to the council. Again, that was, I think, sent out to everyone. And I think this is an opportunity to, since everyone has reviewed them, to solicit input or any questions that there may be on any of them.
If I could jump in here for just a second, Ron. With us having so many new members, I just wanted to kind of put those on the table. I think Rex spoke to this in his introductory comments. This council is really just a feedback loop is perhaps the best way to describe it. And the existing members are welcome to jump in here as well. The historical members, you're all existing members, I guess, but the legacy members. But it's really more about the coordinating board and then the leadership from the community technical colleges engaging in a conversation, a dialogue. And the task assigned to the council is just kind of the rules, the administrative code. Every committee has to have tasks assigned to it. And it just kind of gives us enough space to dialogue. But I wanted to bring that to the new members really and truly, and maybe have a space that if you have any questions about why am I here or any of that kind of stuff, we might have a dialogue about that for a few minutes if needed.
Yeah, does anyone have any questions or comments concerning the tasks that have been assigned to the council? Or I think as time goes on, we'll have information on how those tasks have been are being met. If not, then we can move to the legislative update. John White is the governmental relations. Is that a good term? Okay. Okay. And I think one of the things you're going to talk to us about is the planning and development of the coordinating board legislative priorities.
Yes, sir.
During this last session, and explain how the agency developed those priorities, and then how it was inputted into the legislature, and whether we learned anything from this session on those inputs.
Absolutely.
So if you could deliver that, that'd be wonderful.
Thank you. For those of you who are new to the committee, I want to introduce myself. My name is John Wyatt. I'm Director of External Relations here at the Coordinating Board. And I head up the team here at the agency that's responsible for how we engage essentially with the legislature. During session, that involves a lot of, answering inquiries from legislators, helping them understand issues that are oftentimes new to them. It involves a lot of engagement with stakeholders at institutions, in the business community to make sure we understand what their interests and priorities are in regard to the legislature. And it does involve also developing a set of legislative recommendations that our board adopts to take to the legislature each session. Shortly I'll kind of walk through that process with you and answer any questions that you have. Just to give you a snapshot of where we are in terms of the legislature, at the last session, I presented an overview of the outcomes from the regular session. We did have a special called session that met during July and August. However, there really wasn't anything particularly higher ed related that came out of that session. So we dodged a bullet on that one. Now, the governor does have the capacity up until the next regular session to call additional special sessions. There's been no indication that he intends to do so, but it's something to just be cognizant of. In terms of what we're working on during this interim, there's a couple things just to highlight for y'all. As you know, the Hurricane Harvey impact has been significant for our state, and the governor has done a couple of things in this regard. He did name Chancellor Sharp as the head of his committee for the restoration of Texas in light of the hurricane damage. He also charged the commissioners of the Coordinating Board, TEA, and TWC to work together to develop strategies for not only the immediate recovery of the impacted area, but also looking more longer term in terms of what the workforce needs are going to be down there and how do we address them. The commissioners had their first meeting, I believe it was Tuesday, to have that initial conversation about what do we need to do. So right now, the commissioners are looking at, they want to get down to the region, so they want to have some meetings in the next couple of years in impacted communities. We're also, and we've been working here at the Coordinating Board on developing and having conversations about what is the need in the area, what is the need in terms of what sort of immediate workforce do we need, obvious things like roofers, sheetrockers, those kind of trades that are going to be needed in the immediate future in order to begin that recovery process, as well as looking at more longer term in terms of where the need is going to be. So we've had some conference calls, some conversations with many of you in terms of identifying that need, but then also what are the resources that we can quickly ramp up to meet that need in terms of the sorts of training programs that are available, and how can they be made to quickly respond to getting workers ready and available. Some of the challenges that have been immediately identified by many of you has been, identifying what is that pool that is going to be able to benefit from quick training and getting out into the workforce. There are many people in the region who, they've lost jobs or they're unemployed or underemployed to begin with. That's a potentially ripe population for helping to get into training programs, but how do you identify them and then how do you communicate with them and make sure they're aware of the opportunities that are available? So that's something we're continuing to have conversations about and trying to identify what's the best way to make sure that we can direct people toward these opportunities. Another item we're dealing with on the hurricane recovery is what do we need to do in terms of our rules and procedures to facilitate y'all being able to address your needs. You're probably aware memos have gone out regarding pushing back the census date in terms of the timely distribution of financial aid. And all of those have been in response to what we're hearing from you. So it's very important that we recognize that this recovery it's not just about the first few weeks. I mean, there's going to be implications for months and years going forward. But if you're finding that there's a coordinating board rule or procedure or reporting requirement that you're having difficulty meeting because of the hurricane impact, we need to know about that as soon as possible, because we can tweak our own procedures, and we also have authority from the governor's office that, if there is a rule or a statute that needs to be waived immediately, we can go to the governor's office and request that. And they've been very good about turning that around very quickly. But the sooner you can let us know, the sooner we can go through that process and get you relief. The other item that I'd mentioned during the interim, during the build-up to the next session, the legislature will have what are called interim hearings. So each of the committees will have hearings probably starting after the new year to look at what are the items that they think are going to be important to discuss and legislate on during the next session. And what kind of kicks that off is what are called the interim charges. So we are aware that the lieutenant governor has requested of senators that they provide him recommendations for interim charges by next Friday. And so these interim charges will be what are the specific topics that we want our committees to discuss. So the coordinating board will be making some recommendations to members regarding topics that they might want to consider. We're still developing those right now. But I'd also encourage you to contact your members directly and make sure they're aware of, what are your concerns, what are your issues, what are the items that you think, hey, you guys really need to be giving some time to think about before we get into kind of the rush of session. So I'd strongly encourage you to make sure you're communicating with your representatives. And then the final item is regarding our process for developing legislative recommendations. As I mentioned, our board, prior to each legislative session, adopts a set of recommendations to the legislature. These are recommendations for funding. They're recommendations for changes to financial aid programs, changes to how we do business as a state in order to assist students in higher education. Usually our board adopts that late spring, early summer. But then the process for developing those recommendations actually starts right about now. And in terms of timing, it'll be in the next couple weeks that we'll start those conversations internally with staff in terms of, what are the items that you see as needing some sort of legislative fix? What are the arenas where you see problems, where you see opportunities, so that we can start to build that list of here are all the potential recommendations that we can make to the legislature. We also depend on our stakeholders in terms of developing those recommendations. So, actually had the same conversation with our Financial Aid Advisory Committee last week, but we really want to hear from you either through this forum or through contacting us directly in terms of where do you see something that needs a legislative fix. It's either a problem or, as I said, an opportunity for the legislature to get involved and make your operations more efficient, provide for your students more effectively. As we develop our recommendations at the agency over the next several months, we'll also be having a conversation with you in terms of, well, these are the items we're looking at. What's your input? What's your feedback? So we use that feedback to tailor our recommendations, but also it's useful to have that exchange even where we might be recommending something that y'all might think is not the way to go. We can't always guarantee that we're going to be in perfect alignment, but what we want to understand is where you're coming from. And can we make modifications to our recommendations that are going to make them, oftentimes what we'll get from stakeholders is, issues we don't know about the administrative difficulty of implementing some of these recommendations. So it's important for us to have that perspective. And again, this is a forum where over the next several months we'll be discussing those items so that we can better understand your input. In terms of what we'll be bringing to the legislature next time, impossible to say at this point. I can tell you some items where, and I should back up to say fundamentally, the foundation of everything that we recommend is 60 by 30 TX. What do we need to do to achieve those 4 goals? What do we need to do to achieve those goals of the educated population, completion, marketable skills, and student debt? So that's going to be kind of our driver about, how can we most effectively meet our targets as a state in achieving those goals? Some of the specific items that are likely to be discussed, our commissioner, wants to really take a hard look at financial aid in terms of particularly how can we better integrate work experience into financial aid and how we help fund students' educations. We actually had legislation this last session, our Texas Works bill, that would have restructured off-campus work study to allow us to more efficiently provide that and to ensure that we could partner with private sector employers to utilize work study as a way of getting students money in their pockets, pay for education, but then also marketable skills and relevant experience. I think that's going to be a big conversation is how do we use internships, apprenticeships, work study more thoughtfully in terms of how we we help students enroll and excel in higher education. There are some perennial topics that are going to come up in the legislature, whether we want them to or not. The issue of Hazelwood is one that's not going to go away. The Hazelwood costs, continue to grow, but, the fundamental political difficulty remains in trying to address that. So that's something the legislature is probably going to wrestle with next session. The issue of tuition and fees is going to be one that's going to come up again next session. Now, the great thing about this group is y'all have a great story to tell when it comes to tuition and fees. I believe community colleges in Texas are the third best or most affordable option for students in the state. But this issue of the increase in tuition and fees and how we can make that more affordable is a topic that's going to come up again. So that's kind of my initial presentation, but I really want to kind of throw it open to what kind of questions y'all have and how I can address your concerns.
What do you anticipate, John, as far as the legislative approach for tuition and fees?
It's difficult to say. So you had this last session, SB 18, which as it came out of the Senate, would have incorporated a short-term tuition freeze, and then after that would have conditioned tuition increases on certain performance metrics. And so that was the approach that the Senate took. The House never really took up this issue last session, so it's hard to know where those legislators are. And that, what ended up kind of freezing things on tuition and fees was a provision that was added in the Senate. The Senate bill had a financial aid program, a new financial aid program in it. And there was an amendment that was added that would restrict that program to those eligible for federal financial aid, i.e. undocumented students would not be eligible for that financial aid program. That was a fight that I don't think the legislature was really interested in having. There was a divisive fight over sanctuary cities, and so they didn't really want to have that fight, that same fight essentially for students in higher education. I don't see that going away. That's going to be an issue that's going to come up again in the next legislature. Obviously, this conversation also has a federal aspect to it in terms of what's happening right now with DACA students. So it's going to be difficult for the legislature to make any major changes to tuition and fees or financial aid without having that conversation. I believe so. I believe that was only universities. So as I said, y'all have been kind of particularly when the commissioners made presentations regarding affordability, y'all have been the sector we've really pointed to as doing a very good job in making sure that you remain accessible and affordable to your students.
What about dual credit? I know that was delayed from this session to the next session. What are your early thoughts and forecast?
Dual credit is one of those issues that it's just going to keep growing. So, you had HB 505 a couple of sessions ago, which really kind of opened the door in terms of availability of dual credit. I think the legislature is going to be interested to know what's happened since then. We do have a couple of bills, and Rex might be able to provide some more information on implementation, but they did pass requirements in terms of setting a statewide strategic goals for dual credit, and then implementing those goals into any new dual credit arrangements going forward. So they're going to want to know, what's the outcome of that process? What have we identified as those goals?
Yeah, I mean, I think, part of what happened in this last legislative session was that a lot of people made the argument that that there should not be anything major done with dual credit to allow some time to study the issue. So there's at least, there's a couple of studies underway now. The UT system has conducted a study of dual credit within their own system, and that report will be out in a few months, I think. And while it is confined to the UT system, there ought to be some things in it that's instructive, nevertheless, about how dual credit operates. There's also a study underway that the coordinating board is sponsoring with RAND and AIR to look at issues around dual credit, and those of you who are presidents have been probably have seen some of this, and you will probably. So if some of you want to volunteer for the pilot study for advising protocol, let me know after this, and I think I can fix you right up. If you want to be in on that. And so that study is going to look at a number of issues, including funding, which is going to look at that issue. It's also going to try to take a look at some of the issues that surround quality and rigor. It's also going to look at this whole notion of which is kind of interesting about what is is often described as the sweet spot for dual credit. So, is there a sort of an optimal level of dual credit for a student that is going to encourage them to go on and help them, but beyond which they lose hours? What we discovered last year as a result of some of our look at transfer, and I'll come back and talk about that later on in the agenda, is that dual credit students with dual credit tend to have more excess hours than students who don't have dual credit. So how do you address that issue as a part of it? But that study hopefully will be wrapped up enough by the end of next summer that it can help inform legislation going forward. And then the coordinating board, we were also tasked with conducting a study on transfer that also explicitly mentions dual credit in it. So we'll be looking at that issue. And then there's the legislation about, in conjunction with, or in collaboration with TEA, the coordinating board is responsible for setting goals and objectives, as John mentioned, for dual credit. And then those goals and objectives then must be a part of the MOUs that are written between colleges and the school districts. And needless to say, I think that's going to be a real interesting process. We will start meetings with tomorrow, or maybe it's later today. No, actually later today. Today is Thursday, right? Okay, so later today, we'll actually have an initial meeting with TEA to sort of work out how that process is going to be. It's also one of those items that we will certainly keep this group informed about and seek your feedback and input on it as well as a whole bunch of other stakeholders out there. So we'll keep you informed about how that's unfolding, because I think in a lot of ways, as far as dual credit goes, that may be the most important piece of legislation to come out of this last session about defining what goals and objectives are for dual credit. So you can imagine that goals and objectives can be very wide open, they can be very narrow, they can be some mix of both, or all of those things and above. So I think there'll be a lot of that, and I think the studies that are underway will help inform the legislative session next time around about what, if anything, we ought to do about dual credit. So,
Rex, was there any conversation included or a part of this conversation with dual credit about the early college high schools? And
well, yeah, because that is dual credit. That is a form of dual credit. And one of the interesting things is that, and I think we can begin to do some of this parsing out of who's an early college high school student as opposed to who's other kind of dual credit. And having been at institutions that had both dual credit and having started in early college high school, then I think that the results from those two could be very different, or at least statistically significantly different. And so I think that's something that we need to look at and make sure that we don't conflate the two too much. So, yeah.
John, you mentioned something a little earlier about financial aid and employment. Could you expound upon that a little bit?
Sure. And, this is something that, again, we, during the legislative session, we had worked with legislators on a program to take the current work-study off-campus program and to centralize it at the coordinating board through a process whereby we would work with private employers to develop substantive internship opportunities for students. So the goal is, in order to really kind of deliver on all 4 of our goals for 60 by 30 techs is helping use work study funds to get students into internship, apprenticeship, work situations where they're getting paid. So that's helping them afford their education, but they're also developing those marketable skills. And so doing that in kind of a centralized, organized way. So it's something that, we had a bill, this last session. We really want to spend this interim working on refining that approach and making sure that it's the right approach, it's something that works for students, works for y'all, and helps, and the challenge that, our commissioner always identifies is, we've got to be finding innovative ways to deliver financial aid because, we lobby for an increase in financial aid. We've done so every session, but we got to face some realities about what the legislature is willing to fund. So being able to find innovative ways to deliver that financial aid that's going to be politically appealing, I think is going to help us both argue for more funds and ensure that the funds are delivered efficiently.
Would it behoove us to enter the discussion at the federal level that's going on about actually legislating DACA policies?
I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole, but, well, let me say this about DACA and, Texas higher ed. So, the system in Texas whereby, these affidavit students are able to qualify for, higher ed residency and state financial aid predates DACA. So in some ways, the fate of DACA is not directly related to that statute in terms of how that is implemented. Now, there's certainly a case to be made that, DACA students, by virtue of having those work permits, have additional opportunity to be able to afford their higher education. I can tell you what our commissioner has said is that really in terms of the devil's going to be in the details on what Congress does on DACA. The president said there's going to be a 6-month period in which Congress is going to consider this and decide how to move forward, if at all. We're certainly paying attention to those conversations, but ultimately, here in Texas, it's going to be, kind of our state statute that governs how students are able to participate in higher ed.
Do we anticipate any changes in the current state statute?
That's a matter for the legislature. So that's something that they're going to have to take up if they want to in the next legislative session. Will they do so? I think the DACA debate is going to be a part of that. What ultimately happens at the federal level will inform that debate, but again, not control it. The focus you saw this last session wasn't in trying to undo the statute, the approach that allows undocumented students to qualify, but rather limiting their access to financial aid programs. So you saw several bills that would have reformed financial aid were found to be subject to amendment that would restrict those programs to federally eligible students. So that's the approach they took last time, as opposed to a wholesale repeal of the statute. What happens next session is really impossible to say at this point. Any other questions?
So Rex, you mentioned that on dual credit that one of the things is funding. So I'm on the Formula Advisory Committee, and we're charged with looking at funding. You also mentioned the studies that are actively going on. Are we seeing, so we have the preliminary release of the RAND study. Are we seeing any other types of things coming out on recommendations for funding, or maybe what are some of the coordinating board's thoughts around that particular topic?
Well, I don't think we've made any decisions about that at this point. One of the things, there's also a dual credit task force, which has members from the coordinating board on it, but Dr. Serrata has also been serving on that committee and on that task force as well. And one of the issues that they're looking at very closely is funding. And I think out of that task force, there may be some recommendations made from it with regard to funding. And, and I know that, that part of what everybody's looking at is the sort of the equity issue, if you will, where it's clear that there are some colleges at both the 2 and the 4-year level that are in a much better position to give dual credit away than others. And also we know that the funding of it in terms of what they charge for tuition and fees is all over the place, everything from 0 to full tuition and fees for dual credit students. And with the opening up a couple of sessions ago of the ability for for ISDs rather to go outside of the service area they're in to procure dual credit elsewhere if they so desire. And there's some, it's not exactly as easy as it sounds, but it's also not that difficult either if you really want to do it. Then that opens it up to a lot of competition, and that creates a lot of friction then oftentimes between those entities that can better afford to not charge for it as opposed to those who cannot. So I know that some of those issues are being looked at. And I think it's just going to be a while before we actually see any kind of recommendations come out on it.
And again, this is the kind of thing that's ripe for one of those interim studies in terms of, because, session is 5 months. So during the actual session itself, they don't have a lot of time to really go into depth on issues. So they try to use the interim to examine those issues. So this is something where, again, it's well worth contacting your senator, your representative, and making sure they're aware this is an issue for us, and we think the legislature should take a look at it before the legislative session.
But before we do that, we had a flight delay. 2 people came in, and prior to your coming, we did a very brief introductions of ourselves. So, Cheryl, if you could start off with that, that'd be great.
My name is Cheryl Sparks, and I serve in the role of president of Howard College. I have been at Howard College for 40 years. I always tell everybody I started when I was 10. And I have just finished my 25th year in the role of president, so got a lot of activity that I have participated in at Howard College, and of course have been a part of Texas Association of Community Colleges all these years, and have seen a lot of change, and have also witnessed a lot of change at the coordinating board. But look,
Jeremy?
Jeremy McMillan, president at Grayson College. I've been there 5 years, a little over 5 years. Sometimes I think 40 years. I've actually served on this committee since its origination, and so glad to be a part of it and be continuing. Thank you, coordinating board, for continuing to have the dialogue.
I'm sorry, Mary, if you'll continue now or start.
Fine. Thank you, Chairman Walker and members of the council. I'm Mary Smith. My official title here is Assistant Deputy Commissioner for Academic Planning and Policy. I also serve as the agency's designated alternative dispute resolution coordinator, and I'm here to provide you some information about the negotiated rulemaking process as we handle it here at the coordinating board. So with that, I'll just give you some background. Many of you already know this information probably, but back in 2013, Senate Bill 215, which was our sunset bill, the 83rd Texas Legislature required the coordinating board to engage in negotiated rulemaking in accordance with the Negotiated Rulemaking Act when adopting policies, procedures, or rules that pertain to certain matters. There's a list of those matters, but the most common ones are things to do with the uniform admission policy, any kind of allocation of funds, any kind of reevaluation of data requests. So those are the types of things that we ask for stakeholder input up front with respect to the negotiated rulemaking process. One of the primary themes that the Sunset Commission's recommendations had to do with was the need for the agency to strengthen input from stakeholders. And the legislature felt that the negotiated rulemaking process is one tool to ensure maximum stakeholder input. Fundamentally, the negotiated rulemaking process is a consensus-based process that uses interest-based negotiation. Representatives from our governmental interest groups negotiate the terms of a proposed rule or a policy or a procedure. The process helps governmental agencies like the Coordinating Board develop proposed policies, procedures, and rules in collaboration with the stakeholders who actually have shared interests. Just as a background, a position is essentially something that you say you want. You must have this. Whereas an interest is really a need and the reason why you need what you want. And so an interest-based versus a positional-based bargaining method enables more collaborative potential, the negotiations. Now, with a consensus decision-making, participants make decisions by agreement rather than by majority vote. In a consensus process, the members of the committee need to define consensus for themselves and then include that definition of consensus in the ground rules. The committee has reached consensus on a matter only when the agreement concurs with the definition of consensus that those members unanimously agreed to by the committee. So displayed here is an example of a consensus definition, and frankly, it's the one that we've used for the last 26 methods of negotiated rulemaking that we've actually held here at the Coordinating Board. And essentially what's happened in the past is that each one of our negotiated rulemaking committees has considered this definition and adopted it. They changed this at this point. So I'll just read it. Consensus will mean that all committee members concur in the decision because their major interests have been taken into consideration and addressed in a satisfactory manner. While the committee members might differ in their acceptance of the individual terms of the agreement, all the members can support the final agreement given the trade-offs and the current circumstances. Essentially what happens is that there's always a mix of interests and issues and values with respect to committee members. And there are likely then to be varying degrees of enthusiasm for the final product, but on that all the parties that are represented can accept as a satisfactory solution to whatever the issue is. Our Coordinating Board rules in Chapter 1, Subchapter 8, specifies exactly all of the processes that we use concerning negotiated rulemaking. Those rules outline the definitions and the requirements for and the key responsibilities of individuals who are involved in the negotiating rulemaking process. For your purposes, I suspect that your primary interest is how we appoint the members to the negotiated rulemaking committees. Essentially, the process is outlined in detail, but just in summary, our convener, Lori Frederick, sends an email to all the affected stakeholders and essentially solicits potential members for the negotiated rulemaking committee. And then I, as the ADR coordinator, meet with the staff members who were involved in crafting that rule. But as you would know, of course, a law is passed, and then we would be responsible for writing a rule about that particular law that might have been passed. And then we meet as a staff to discuss all the nominations and identify potential members. And then once that process is done, which I'll go over in just a little bit more in detail, but essentially what we then do is we submit to the Texas Register a notice of intent to engage in negotiated rulemaking. And that notice of intent includes the members that we have selected among the nominations that we have been provided for that particular committee. In the notice of intent, there's a description of the subject and the scope of the rule that will be developed, and then there's a list of individuals that we're proposing to select to actually be the committee members, and we request comments. And among those comments, we ask for other additional interests that we might not have recognized as of particular interest to the stakeholders. And we also ask that if an individual wants to nominate him or herself or recommend another individual to be on the committee, then during that time, that 10-day comment period, we would ask that that individual provide their own name and contact information, what interests that they might have that are not being represented on the committee that we have selected, and then provide us the name and contact of the individual that they recommend to be on the committee and what their qualifications are. And then after we consider those comments, after that 10-day period has passed, then we all meet again and formally appoint the members. Generally, it's the members that have been already tentatively appointed pending public comment, and then any other individual people that we feel have been justified with respect to those comments that we just talked about. Whether we want to make sure that all interests are actually represented on the committee. And so we also consider the balanced representation of the affected interests. We also consider the size of the committee. We can't really have 100 people on a committee. It's just impossible to negotiate that level of committee. So we really try to keep our negotiated rulemaking committees on a level of 24, just like we do our advisory committees, just simply because it's more manageable. And we also encourage those folks to actually get information from those individuals that they're representing to make sure that all represented interests are expressed during the meeting. They're representing not only their institution or not only their department, rather they're representing all the stakeholders that would have those same interests. So they would be asked to gather that information from their colleagues and other individuals that they know are needing to have their interests represented. And then, of course, we ask that the individuals have specific types of expertise, and so that all those kinds of expertise are represented on the committee. Then we finally approve the committee, and then subject to the committee's approval, we also assign a facilitator to facilitate the negotiated rulemaking process at the meeting. And the facilitator serves as a neutral third party and uses alternative dispute resolution techniques to help committee members reach consensus on all the necessary issues involved in the proposed rule, procedure, or policy. We had thought about actually hiring outside mediators to do this work, but frankly, it became too expensive. So far, we've already had 26 of these negotiated rulemaking committees, and it just would have been too expensive. So essentially what we did is we selected individual staff members that show real promise within the agency, and we've sent them to the 40-hour mediation training to get trained as a mediator. And so they're certified mediators as a result of being trained formally, and also their background at the coordinating board. We can kind of identify individuals who might be good at facilitating discussions among individuals. Their duties essentially fall into two related categories. They're facilitating communication and they're mediating. And by doing those tasks, that frees the coordinating board to actually have a representative on the committee to represent the interests of the state. As you see here, the members of the committee are really in a representative role, again, on behalf of all the stakeholders that might have their shared interests. They identify the issues to be negotiated, they review information, they come to negotiate in good faith, and they negotiate the text or outline of a rule or a procedure or a policy, and the idea is to reach consensus, and then they provide a report to the coordinating board. The most significant differences between consultative and consensus-based processes are how the decision is made and what happens to the product of the discussions. So in a consultative type of a situation, the agency receives input, then staff members formulate the rule or the policy or the procedure. In a consensus process, the agency puts the product of consensus out for public comment and public review as the proposed decision. In the consensus process, you see, that rule that is crafted by the negotiated rulemaking committee is the one that is submitted for public comment and is the one that is ultimately provided to the coordinating board for adoption. The agency that convenes any negotiated rulemaking committee still does retain the final decision-making authority, but again, they put the negotiated rulemaking committee's decision forward as the one that will be considered by the board and during the comment period. There are some advantages and disadvantages to each of these approaches. The advantages, of course, for a negotiated rulemaking process is that it's an integrative solution that everybody essentially crafts up front, and it actively affirms the importance of the relationship and the content. The other advantage that I've seen is that it really does help for individuals to recognize that it is difficult, even when a law is in place, to craft a rule based on that law that considers everybody's interests. So it's actually been helpful, in my opinion, in our relationships with institutions, because rather than a mandate, we're asking for input and then crafting a rule based on that input. There are disadvantages, which you'll see. Obviously, one of them is time. It does take more time than to have a staff member to simply craft a rule. And another issue is that one person, if they are not negotiating in good faith, can actually derail the negotiations, because if they are absolutely insistent that their position be considered rather than their interests, it can derail the process. So that's why they agree in the very beginning. We actually have them sign a piece of paper that indicates that they are willing to negotiate in good faith, that they are there to really collaborate and craft an integrated solution. Right now, we have 4 committees that are being formed for negotiated rulemaking, and I have the summary up there for you. The first one is based on House Bill 2994 that's relating to workforce continuing education that is being offered by public community colleges. That particular legislation actually requires that we do negotiated rulemaking. It's right in the legislation. The next one is Senate Bill 810, which is related in part to the use of open educational resources. This one, we have decided to negotiate through the negotiated rulemaking process primarily because of our sunset bill. Because remember, the Senate Bill 215, whenever we're allocating funds, we are supposed to negotiate in a negotiated rulemaking process. And this one is to develop rules for the allocation methodology for open educational resources. The third one is also, these are all from the 85th Texas Legislature. This one is based on Senate Bill 1091. It relates to limitations on courses that may be offered for dual credit by school districts and institutions of public education here in Texas. And that legislation, again, actually specifies that not only the coordinating board, but also the Texas Education Agency collaborate and in a negotiated rulemaking process develop rules through the negotiated rulemaking process. And then a fourth one, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute, is really based on our sunset legislation. But for these first 3 committees that I show up there, the convening memos requesting nominations have already gone out, and the nomination deadline actually expired already for these 3. It was August the 25th, and the nominees have been preliminary selected to serve on the committees, and the notices of intent have gone out, and we are right now in the process of the 10-day open comment period. The target dates for the convening of the committees are October the 23rd, October the 30th, November the 1st, or November the 2nd, depending on the dates that work best for the final committee members. Essentially, we have 4 dates that we've blocked them on our calendars and have asked all of the tentative committee members to block those dates, and then as we move forward, we're going to confirm on those dates. For your purposes, the notice of intent, the expiration date expires September the 18th. I have them here if you want to look at them. I'm happy to just show you them. But if you would like, you can look at the Texas Register to see who has been tentatively appointed to these committees. And if you don't think that your interests are being represented by one of the members that we have selected for the committee, then we welcome you to provide that information to us on another member that we might consider adding to the committee or replacing a member. Remember, we try to keep it manageable. So you can kind of tell if we've got 24 members, we probably would be wanting to replace rather than add another individual or two to this committee. But regardless, if there's a real good reason that your interests and your colleagues' interests are not represented, then we will definitely consider adding another person to the committee. The meetings are held here in Austin at the Coordinating Board from 9:30 to 4:30, and assuming the committees reach consensus, the negotiated rules will be considered by the board of the Coordinating Board at the January meeting on January the 25th. There is one final negotiated rulemaking committee meeting committee that's being organized, as you see there. It's the Negotiated Rulemaking Committee on Data Request Reevaluation. And if you remember from the very beginning of my little presentation here, amongst that list of things that we need to use negotiated rulemaking for are data requests. So this is a committee that is essentially going to look at all the different things that we ask of you at your institutions and whether or not some of those things could be revised. So it's going to probably be a process that we adopt so that we will be able to use that process in the future. Again, I'll just tell you for this committee, the fourth committee, the convening memos requesting nominations have already been emailed to the stakeholders, and the nomination deadline expired on September the 11th, just on Monday. The nominees have been selected again, the tentative nominees, and the notice of intent to engage in negotiated rulemaking has been submitted to the Texas Register. That notice is going to be published on September the 22nd, and again, we will have another 10-day public comment period for potentially additional members or revisions to the ones that we've chosen, and that deadline will expire on October the 2nd. And then the targeted dates for the convening that particular committee, we also have another 4 dates. Again, we've asked that those potential committee members block those dates: November the 10th, November the 15th, December the 4th, or December the 5th, depending on the dates that, again, work best for the committee. And again, the meeting will be from 9:30 to 4:30, and assuming they reach consensus with 1 or 2 meetings, the negotiated rules will be considered by the board at the April meeting on April the 26th of 2018. Here's the timeline, and I wanted to just share with you, this is, as I shared, one of the difficulties of negotiated rulemaking. But if you really look at it, a lot of the time that's involved with a negotiated rulemaking process are the comment periods. So, for example, from August the 7th through August the 7th through August the 25th, that was a 2-week time frame for the individuals that we ask the presidents and the chancellors to either forward that memo or be a part of it themselves, or to forward it to the particular individual for the nominations. That takes 2 weeks. And then the 10-day comment period for the notice of intent, that's another 10 days. And then once the rule is actually crafted by the negotiated rulemaking committee, there's a 30-day comment period, as there would be for any rule that the staff would have generated based on whatever reason that we needed to craft this rule. So although it's a long, lengthy process, it does have some big chunks that are essentially just the waiting periods. And frankly, I'm an enthusiastic supporter of negotiated rulemaking. I think it has really big benefits. I've actually watched what I thought was, we generally use what we call a straw man rule. We come to the negotiated rulemaking committee with the text that we think might work, more or less, and then we project that on a screen just like that, and then they start changing words and adding things and little nuances that amazingly really help the rule, because some things we just don't really know that there are interests out there, and the individuals that are on these committees, they allow a collaboration of mind that crafts a rule that really serves the interests of the stakeholders that they're representing. So with that, I'll close my appeal for negotiated rulemaking and be delighted to answer any questions you might have.
Mary, is negotiated rulemaking mandated, or is selective process on which rules are done this way?
It's actually mandated for certain things.
For certain
So
things.
there's the Negotiated Rulemaking Act, and then if we're crafting a rule here at the coordinating board that has specifically this list, which I could essentially read to you, then it's really mandated by our Sunset Bill. And then sometimes it's actually mandated right in the legislation, like the ones that just passed the legislature. It's sitting there right in the bill that the coordinating board will draft a rule on the basis of a negotiated rulemaking process.
And when stakeholders are notified, are those generally all of the community colleges, their presidents receive that notice?
Essentially, what happens is that we meet with staff, as the ADR coordinator, and Lori Frederick is our convener. We meet with a staff member who's been, like, for example, in Rex's area. We would meet with Rex and his program director that would have been potentially assigned that legislation. And then we all meet together to determine who specifically is included in whatever this legislation is, and to make sure that we cover everybody that could potentially have an interest in this particular legislation. And then we send out, through the governmental delivery system, requests for nominations for everybody that could be affected.
And when you've gone through that process and it ends up before the board for adoption, have they ever ceased to accept a recommendation?
Not yet. And they haven't always reached consensus. Frankly, there was one committee that didn't reach consensus. And even if they don't reach consensus, and what happens is if they say they really, truly don't reach consensus, then it is the responsibility of the coordinating board to go ahead and move forward with the rule. But the coordinating board has, in that instance, really considered the deliberations of that particular committee up until that time. And as it turned out, that particular issue really had to be resolved by the Texas legislature. It was basically that they had put into the same pot of money technical schools and community colleges. They just had to be separated out into this different pots. And once that happened, then we had another negotiated rulemaking, the two different sets, and then they came together. So it's been a really positive process, I think.
It seems like it would be. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very
I'm delighted
much.
to answer any questions in the future. There's my contact information if you would like to contact me. And thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts about negotiated rulemaking.
Well, one rule right now is we're going to skip number 7 and go to number 8. Adam, the presenter for number 7, is not present but on his way. So this is going to be a discussion of the application for baccalaureate degrees for public junior colleges. I think we all received the information about Senate Bill 2118 in our materials, and I think everyone is familiar with Rex, who's going to visit about this. He's Assistant Commissioner for Academic Quality and Workforce.
Okay, so I assume I can change this from here, right? We'll find out in a minute. We'll find out in a second whether it'll work or not. So I'm sure that most of you are aware that one of the more significant pieces of legislation that passed in this last session pertaining to community colleges deals with the issue of offering baccalaureate degrees at the community college level. And prior to that, I guess this has been about 15 years ago now or so, there were 3 colleges, South Texas, Brazos-Port, and Midland College, authorized to offer baccalaureate degrees. In the previous, the legislative session before this last one, Tyler Junior College was authorized to offer a baccalaureate degree in dental hygiene, and kind of put in the same category as the other 3 colleges were. And so there's been a lot of bills introduced about, mostly by individual institutions, seeking authorization to offer a bachelor's degree at that particular institution. And the coordinating board has argued that if you're going to do this, then it probably should be done the way other bachelor's degrees are generally approved in Texas, and that is they go through a process and then approval either winds up at a staff level or approval winds up with the coordinating board itself. So this legislation does that, and it does have, but however, it does have some restrictions on it that don't apply to four-year schools, and so I'll try to walk through this. And you don't think that'll work from here? Why not?
Because it's a PDF.
Oh, that's right. Okay. That explains it. Okay. Which is what Rhonda was trying to tell me, but I can pretend nevertheless, right, that I'm in control? Okay. All right. So, so there are program limits on this, and as you can see in the slide there, and so one of them is that what we often refer to around here is the legacy institutions. So those four colleges that were previously authorized to offer baccalaureate degrees, South Texas, Brazosport, Midland, and Tyler Junior College, can offer up to 5 degrees each. Under this legislation, though, community colleges are restricted to no more than 3 at each institution at a time. So that's one restriction that's placed on it. It also says that the institutions have to meet all other restrictions, or all other criteria, rather, that any baccalaureate degree has to meet. And most of those revolve around things like, do you have adequate faculty? Do you have adequate facilities? If those are necessary, do you have the appropriate library resources to support the program? And so on. Is there established workforce need? We look at that for every bachelor's degree program. Is there some kind of established workforce need, either on a regional or a statewide basis for this, and so on. So there's that set of criteria. There's also, let's see, we didn't include that there, but there's also a criteria that for community colleges that want to offer a baccalaureate degree, they have at least $6 billion in taxable valuation. And for those institutions that also have a branch maintenance tax in different places, that the valuation in those districts or those counties is also included in that $6 billion calculation. And what that means is that there's about 20 community colleges, I think it's 19 or 20 community colleges in Texas that do not meet that threshold as of now, and it would be based on whatever the previous year's appraisal came out from your appraisal district. So, okay, that's really going to make it difficult for me to figure out where I'm at anyway. Okay. So I talked about that, so keep going. That's all right. Okay, we're good. So, and that talks about the financing available. So there's, and so forth. There's another little piece of this that has to do with the financing part of this, and that is that, just hold it right there. And that is that you also have to meet the standard for financial stability. So I'm sure that a lot of you are at least aware of the fact that the coordinating board creates a list every year and talks about the financial stability of institutions and whether they meet that criteria or not. There's a couple of caveats in that we're looking at in terms of implementing in the rules, and that is that sometimes you get this annual report and it looks like you're no longer financially stable because one of two things has happened. Either something has happened with the general accounting standards, and that has caused a change in the way this is done, and that can actually make you look like you're financially unstable when in fact you actually are. And in fact, nothing has really changed at your institution from one year to the next, but the accounting standard has changed. It then makes it look as though you're not. So, and we always try to take account of that when we look at that issue. And the other is that there may be something that happened at your institution that while you may obviously be financially sound, otherwise you may appear not to be. And that could happen, for example, if you refinanced a bunch of bonds. So you had a lot of bond money out, and then you refinanced it in a particular year, so it looks like you're taking a hit in a year when in reality you're not. It's just because you refinanced. So if those extenuating circumstances exist at an institution, then we will look at those and take those into account in determining whether you meet that particular criteria or not. And so, you got to have enough. One of the other things that we look at for every degree is, in addition to the financial stability, do you also anticipate sufficient enrollment for this to work? Are you going to have sufficient revenue, and how is that generated? You cannot depend. Formula funding there's always a lag time with formula funding, so that whatever you're generating this year, you don't get for 2 years. So you have to be able to demonstrate that you have the ability to fund this program. And in this case, with community colleges, you need to be able to demonstrate that you can fund it for at least 5 years through. So there's always that criteria about how do you get this thing started before you then begin to get formula funding in to help offset some of those costs. So that's something else that we look at in terms of programs, both for the operating cost and the instructional administration of the program. I mentioned library resources and faculty and staff. So scroll up or scroll down. Yeah, keep going. Let's see, we talked about all that. Now, if you read the legislation surrounding this, it says that anyone applying for one of these degrees has to meet all of the standard criteria that's applied to all other bachelor's degree programs. Then it says, and there's some more stuff you have to meet. Okay? So the bar has been set very high. And so what we'll talk about now is some of those additional requirements that are applicable to community colleges. And this is where the $6 billion comes into play. That's certainly not, because you have your own property tax and that kind of thing that typical four-year institutions do not have. So a part of this really deals with workforce need and other things. So how is it going to complement other programs? It also says that if you want to have a bachelor's degree at the community college level, it has to be built on a successful Associate of Arts degree. So if you want a bachelor's degree in a program that you've never had before, then you'll need to start with an Associate of Applied Science degree and then move up from there. Okay, and part of this is do you have some underlying foundation for the program, both in terms of faculty, facilities, support, but also in terms of do you have a pipeline for it as well, or are you going to develop a pipeline for this program? And so that's a particular piece of this, and are those successful? This is a part of what we're sort of ironing out as we go along in terms of what does all this mean? What is a successful program as opposed to one that's unsuccessful? Look at. So we'll be looking at that as well. And one of the big factors in program approval is what we refer to as the non-duplication issue. And so always something that we consider, and this is true whether it's particularly at the bachelor's degree level and on up. So it applies to bachelor's, but all graduate programs as well. And that is, does the program unnecessarily duplicate other programs? So if there's already 4 other programs in the area, none of which are at capacity, then a 5th program would unnecessarily duplicate. Now, that might not always be the case. There was a bachelor's degree a couple of years ago, or it was a master's degree, I believe, that we approved in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. There were 3 other programs within close proximity, all the same thing. All of those programs were at capacity. They all said, we're at capacity, we have no intention of expanding our capacity, and so then a 4th program was appropriate to approve, because then there would be no duplication of that effort. And all 3 of them said, yeah, we got it, but we're full, and we don't have any plans to expand, so therefore a 4th program is not going to detract from us in any way. And so the program was approved. But that's where the duplication efforts come. And, and part of that what's underlies that is the fact that these programs receive formula funding from the state, and so part of our charge is to try to make sure that there's efficient use of state resources in higher education. Okay, and we already talked about the $6 billion thing, inadequate resources, and the positive assessment of overall financial health. I already talked about that. One of the pieces of this, if you're not one of the 4 legacy institutions, then another piece of this that actually came as a surprise to one institution, and that is if you want to offer a bachelor's degree in Texas and you want to get federal financial aid for it, then you cannot avoid getting a level 2 status from the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. And I actually had a phone call with an institution, and when I mentioned the fact, I said, well, you're going to have SACS approval to go level 2. It was like, oh, really? And I said, oh, yeah, really. And in our discussions with SACS, that approval could only come after you've had approval from the coordinating board to offer the degree. But that will be necessary. And having come from an institution that was one of those 4 legacy institutions, then I can tell you that what happens to you then is, well, first of all, it's expensive. Okay, so it's going to cost you some money to do this because they're going to expect you to ramp up some things that you might not have thought about before. And there's always the aftermath of that, because even if all you ever do is for the rest of that institution's history, you only offer 1 bachelor's degree program, you will forever be treated as a level 2 institution by SACS. And that is different from a level 1 institution. And not bad, but it's different. And so you always have to keep in mind that from now on, then you're going to be, in their eyes, you're a level 2 institution. Now, in the state, for the state of Texas, in many, many ways, you're still a community college. You're still a public 2-year institution. But for SACS, you're now a 4-year institution. And so that's a piece of it that will have to be dealt with as well. Okay. And so you're going to have to submit a report about faculty recruitment and so forth. There's a concern, and this is actually something that we look at to some extent in bachelor's degree program approval, but especially when we approve master's degree programs and on up. And that is, so if you already have a bachelor's degree in something and now you want to offer a master's degree in it, are you simply going to rob Peter to pay Paul, and are you going to decimate your bachelor's degree program so you can have a master's degree program? Are you going to decimate a master's degree so you can have a doctoral program? So in this case, are you going to decimate your associate degree program so you can have a bachelor's degree program? And clearly the legislature is interested in making sure that that does not happen, that you still maintain your mission of providing associate degree programs, and that does not suffer as a result of the bachelor's degree program. And this really all goes back to demonstrating that you have adequate facilities, adequate faculty, and so forth to do both of those things and maintain. And really it's kind of a rarity where we find an institution that they're sort of cannibalizing one degree program to support another degree program. But it does happen every once in a while. And we also look at program capacity, and this is one of the things that's going to be a bit tricky, I think, because part of what the community colleges are going to have to demonstrate, and we get at this to some degree already through program approval, is this notion of no one else is either willing or able to do this. And I think this is going to be particularly important when it comes to your Bachelor of Science in Nursing degree programs. For a lot of other Bachelor of Applied Technology or Bachelor of Applied Science degree programs, you're probably not going to have a lot of built-in competition from other schools already. Brazosport actually offers a sort of classic example of this. If you look at their process technology management degree program, 4-year schools, and actually the business and industry actually first went to the 4-year sector and said, do you want to do this? And they said, no, we're really not interested in doing this. And so Brazosport then developed that degree program, and they really had no competition for it, and they still don't, in fact. And so in Midland's case, for example, there was no one offering a Bachelor of Applied Technology degree in organizational management there. Now, after Midland's was started and was successful, then UTPB decided to offer one, but that was after the fact. And so part of this is are there other entities around you that can offer this degree? And do they have the capacity to support what you're doing? So this is always an important issue. This is sometimes also wrapped up in what's referred to as the 50-mile rule. And this is where you want to offer a new degree program. This is something community colleges are not used to, because typically if you're within your service area and you want to offer a new degree program, the only thing that we have to look at is whether it makes sense in your service area or not does it make sense on a statewide basis. But at the baccalaureate level, it's broader than that. And so the question then is there anybody else around you that already offers this program, and are they at capacity? And so in essence, what this means is that, and again, this is going to be particularly applicable to the Bachelor of Science and Nursing degree. And so if you want to offer a Bachelor of Science and Nursing degree, and there are a lot of institutions that offer these programs, and there's already 6 other programs around you, and within that 50-mile radius, if you're talking about online, we're going to look at statewide capacity, then do they have the capacity to ramp up their program? Do they already have excess capacity in their program? That goes back to the non-duplication issue. And that's what this articulation agreement, if you read the legislation, that's what this articulation agreement stuff is designed to get at. Is there somebody out there that's already doing this that can fulfill the need? And if not, are they willing to say, and we're not going to do this either? And that does happen. I mean, I see it a lot where a program says, look, we got 100 students already, and that's all we ever want. So if what we need in this region is to be graduating 150, then there's a space there for somebody else to fill that in. And oftentimes that's just a function of their own ability to have faculty and facilities and so forth. Now, a lot of BSN programs don't require or require very little in the way of clinicals and that kind of thing, so it's a little bit easier to get at. But you're still going to have something about clinical space. So you're going to have agreements where if you're going to offer clinicals, then you'll have to demonstrate that that space exists, that it's there, that it's available, and that you're not going to be displacing someone else's clinicals. All right. So move ahead. Teach out agreements are required. This is also a SACS requirement. If you want a degree, you have to have some ability that if you've allowed students into a program and then for some reason you have to shut the program down before those students can exit, then you need to have some mechanism with another institution. And so this is not uncommon at all. This happens all the time with new programs. Okay. And then there's also this thing about making sure that your students are aware of the other programs in the area and that kind of thing, and reporting. And so go ahead and move up a little bit, Rhonda. And if we've already gone through the bachelor's degree stuff, no, this is required. So the other piece of this is for any of your bachelor's degree programs, you'll have to submit a biennial report that will be due before the legislative session every 2 years, submit to the coordinating board. And we're in the process, or we soon will be in the process, rather, figuring out exactly what the format of that would be. The 4 institutions that were in part of these pilot projects before all had to submit reports to the coordinating board before, so we'll probably get out a couple of those old reports and use that as our starting point, and then eliminate what we can and add what we have to it. So we'll try to make that as least burdensome as we can on the institutions and on us, because we're going to have to read them if you turn them in. So, okay. So going down. Okay. And then if one of the degrees you want to offer is a Bachelor of Science in Nursing degree, there are additional requirements placed on top of that. So you can see that there's a very high bar to getting one of these degrees. And so part of that goes back to this idea about long-term clinical space. So you have to demonstrate that you've achieved, that you've got this already, and that you're not going to displace somebody else in doing so. And that talks about that. Then you also have to show that your corresponding associate applied science degree program is effective both in terms of licensure. This also requires you to, go ahead, this also requires you to meet the standards of that Board of Nursing requires, whether it's a licensure or non-licensure program. And this is a new wrinkle, because what the Board of Nursing does is they regulate licensure programs. What most community colleges are going to do, since they have to build on a successful Associate of Applied Science degree, their ADN program, then they're going to create what's often referred to as a transition program so that the student can transition from ADN to BSN. But there is no additional licensure involved, because the ADN program already establishes your ability to take the NCLEX and become a registered nurse. So there is no additional licensure involved, so the Board of Nursing has never actually entered this space before. But this legislation says that you must meet the requirements set out by the Board of Nursing, regardless of whether it's a licensure or non-licensure program. And so we're in discussions with the Board of Nursing about exactly how that's going to work in terms of meeting those requirements. Okay. And then a couple of other pieces about this has to do with funding. And one of the differences between the legacy institutions and community colleges going forward with funding is that the legacy institutions can get funding at the upper division level that four-year institutions get. In these new programs, you'll be funded at the same level that your associate degrees were funded at. So there's not that little boost in income there. So it's something to keep in mind if you want to do one of these things, and that's the way it sets now. And so there are some differences there. There's tuition and fee limitations. The legacy institutions can charge higher rates for their upper division courses. You'll only be allowed to charge the same rate you charge for your lower division courses. So your funding will be restricted to lower division rates, and your tuition and fees will be restricted to lower division rates as well. And I suppose that was put in there to determine just how serious you really are about offering these or something. It is kind of interesting. And while I will also point out that while the coordinating board pushed for this kind of legislation, we didn't necessarily push for all of these restrictions that are in there. So I will leave it at that and then try to answer any questions you might have. I will say this, that a lot of this stuff is in progress. We do have an application that's on the website. It has draft on it because we're still trying to work through some of the nuances, especially the relationship with Board of Nursing and exactly how that's going to work. There is another piece of this that I should mention that requires, if you read the legislation, it requires your program that you're applying for, Bachelor of Nursing degree, it requires your nursing degree to be accredited. But you cannot be accredited until you have a graduate. So one could argue, well, this is the classic gotcha, right? I can't have a program until I'm accredited, but I can't get accredited until I have a program and have a graduate, but I don't have a graduate, you know. So we have discussed this with accrediting bodies, and all of them have some kind of candidacy status or provisional status or something. And we're also discussing this with the legislators. I kind of think originally what they meant was that your ADN program should be accredited before you apply for this, not that your bachelor's degree program should be accredited. So what we're going to wind up doing there then is you've applied for candidate status or you have provisional status, whatever they call that, which all of them have some form of that, then that will suffice for being accredited, with the expectation that once you get graduates are in a position then to apply for full accreditation, that you do so. So that seems to be the only reasonable way to work this out. And so far, what we've received back from the legislature on this is, yeah, that'll work. That's fine. So Okay.
Rex, you have to have the coordinating board approval before an institution can go for SACS approval. And it's written in the document that, that you've got there that it's up to 1 year. And I think that's statutorily, you have up to 1 year to do it. But as a matter of the way it usually works, does it take a year?
Bachelor's degrees, it depends on what it is. And so,
Important
and
from a planning
it depends
perspective
on whether
on
it
what-
needs board approval too, or not, by the way. So if a bachelor's degree comes in, it's going to cost more than $2 million over a 5-year period, or it's an engineering degree, then it must go to the board for approval. Any other bachelor's degree that comes in, approval for that stops in my office and is approved by staff then. So a lot of this is going to depend on the costs that are involved in this. I will tell you that most transition programs, I would suspect, would come in at less than $2 million. And so some of that timeline depends. So the year is a statutory thing that we can take up to a year. We can do anything short of that we want to.
Okay.
Some of this is going to depend on, frankly, depends on how good your application is. So if we have to spend a lot of time going back to the institution and saying, okay, you didn't tell us about this, you didn't tell us about this, that takes a long time. And institutions are not always very responsive. Sometimes it takes them a long time sometimes to respond. And sometimes that's because they genuinely don't know what the answer is and need to get it, or sometimes it's just because they're busy and got other things to do. We all understand that. So we will get through this as quickly as we can. Okay. And so we've sort of made that commitment, and I will tell you too that some of this will also depend on how many we get. So we deal with all our proposals, generally speaking, on a first come, first serve. So wherever you're at the queue, that's when we get to you. And keep in mind that I don't have a huge staff to do this, and the legislation did not provide any more staff to do this, and so we're going to be doing all this with what we have existing, and none of this is going to stop all of the other proposals that we get, and we get, and I forget what the average is, but we probably get 100 or more per year from all different levels that have to have some level of scrutiny attached to them. But we'll process as quickly as we can. So thank you.
So Rex, we've talked about this, but you're talking about the accrediting agency and the candidacy challenge and all of that. So the current rules that are out there to make comment on have it as stated. So what is your recommendation in terms of, if you're hearing back from the legislature, do you think that will change in the actual rules themselves? Should we submit comments to that effect? What is your thought about that?
Yeah, so the application has draft marked on it, but the rules are still in a draft stage too. And what we intend to do at this point is take the rules to the December cause January sequence. And so not only there will be an official comment period for this as well, but also anytime before that, if you see something in there, then just send us an email or give us a phone call, and we'll take a look at it. And that would be, I would suspect, it would be one of those things that we might want to flesh that out and alter that so that it specifically says this candidacy provisional status and makes it clear that that's what you need to do. Because you're right, as it is, it really just states what's in the legislation at the moment. Yeah.
So the second question is this whole new process for the Board of Nursing, and so we're sensitive to the timeline issue. We have a real workforce need. That's why we're pursuing these. So do you have any sense of how fast that's moving, what might be coming out of that? If we have to have that approval first, I really commend and appreciate the coordinating board for being proactive and having the application out there, having the draft rules out there. I'm really pleased with how you're moving on that, but we're relying on the Board of Nursing. So do you have any sense of the timeline there?
Well, we've had at least two rather extensive discussions with Board of Nursing about the role they would play, and we got a text message earlier about another meeting as soon as possible to discuss that role as well. And so I think that they've sort of seen it as kind of another approval process. I'm not sure that I see it that way because the legislation doesn't say that it requires Board of Nursing approval. What it says is that the institutions have to meet those criteria. And so what we're thinking about is there may be some way that criteria gets laid out in the application and that they can take a quick look at it and then we can pass on it so that it doesn't then also require Board of Nursing approval, which would probably add a rather substantial amount of time to it. But we're still working that out, and by the way, they've been great to work with. I mean, it's not as though they're demanding anything at all. They're trying to work through it too, and so they've been great to work with, and they're amenable to just about anything. So,
Yeah, so as an institution that's hired an additional person just to work on this, the longer we delay it, the less time we have to get it to market, the more it costs us to, kind of get it off the ground. So the speed is, again, I recognize the speed of the QUIB board, and anything you can do to encourage that with the Board of Nursing is great. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? We'll move to item 7. It's a standing agenda item to get an update from the Texas Association of Community Colleges and Community Colleges Association of Texas Trustees. I think everyone here knows Jacob, who is the president and CEO, and we look forward to your update, and we'll also thank you for all your hard work in the legislature this last session.
Simultaneously, if the president's speak at both sides of my mouth. Thank you, who asked very emphatically and directly and genuinely, how can we help? How can we help? And so I sort of share that with you because Harvey left a disastrous pathway behind. I think that the consummate optimist in me sees that there was a silver lining, and that silver lining is that we came together yet again as a state and as a nation. And so Walter Bumpus, who was president of AACC, was a good colleague in helping us get to that place. So good to see you, everyone, and good to see that everyone is in a good place now. And now, obviously, our hearts and minds are also with our friends in Florida. I wanted to perhaps also start by recognizing and appreciating our partnership with the coordinating board, and not just because this is our home and this is the right place, but they have been very good partners with us. Dr. Peebles and I spent a lot of time walking the hallways of the Capitol during the session on House Bill 2994, which is a legislative priority for our community colleges that would have expanded the authority for us to provide continuing education programming, non-credit based, for some of our students who are still in high school, and certainly for adults, continuing education, and not just in the development of the statute, was Dr. Peebles and his staff and his colleagues, but now that we're in the rulemaking process, have been very good partners in working with us to make sure that we get it right, so that the expansion of authority that we had sought is now is now in place where we can do it and do it in the correct way. Obviously, I just heard the conversation about the baccalaureate bill. This is another area where we worked closely together to make sure that the statute was appropriate and was as necessary. And frankly, even as Harvey was still making his way through the Gulf Coast, the commissioner and Dr. Peebles and Dr. Gardner spent time with us to even begin to hash out the precursor to the draft rules that we see before that. HB 2223, very important to our colleges. This is the conversation that we're having with the coordinating board, if not on a daily basis, certainly on an every other day basis. It's going to be important for our colleges, important for many of our students. And Joel Booker, Dr. Booker and his team have been also excellent partners with us in making sure that we, even as we're thinking about the first draft rules, that we work together, not just on the rules-making process, but also on the important work ahead with regards to technical assistance and providing resources for all of our institutions so that we can get that incredible reform correctly as soon as we can. So I share those three examples as a way of saying we are working collaboratively with the coordinating board, and I personally appreciate the great collaboration that they've shared with us in that space. Sherman, a quick update only because I think it's appropriate and just to provide some context. This has been an incredible year for the association, for our colleges, and that includes up to and including a year of transition. After serving our community colleges for 21 and a half years, Dr. Don Hudson, who had served in the capacity of our Vice President of Research, retired. He retired exactly 2 weeks ago today, on August 31st, after serving our colleges 21 years. We had the great privilege in July of giving him what some of us call a roasting, some of us just call it a good, fair goodbye. And I wanted to recognize his good work here in this body because much of the work that this body does and much of the work that our colleges did depended on the great research that Dr. Hudson provided to us. So I wanted to give him his rightful recognition and then say to all of us that he has gone into retirement, he has not left. He has been gracious to accept an invitation from us to keep him on retainer on a consultant basis, and so his good work will still be with us, and we'll see some days ahead. In that same space, I have a bitter sort of sweet way of saying to you that Dr. Steve Johnson, who has served our colleges, I mean, not just admirably, but with incredible resilience and ethics of an incredible way. I mean, I get emotional when I talk about Steve. Steve has accepted the appointment of Chancellor of Western Governors University, Texas. And so he too will be leaving not our great state, because he will continue to serve Texans across this great state, but he will be leaving TACC and beginning his appointment as Chancellor effective next week. So I share those not to tell you that there's 2 vacancies in the Big Hills, although I will be asking for names here, but to share with you that we are both very proud and very grateful for those 2 gentlemen for the work that they did for all of our colleges and certainly for this committee specifically over the years. Let me then pivot from there to talk a little bit about our collaboration with the Trustees Association and with TAC in a little bit of a yesteryear and then more so in terms of the work ahead. I am deeply, I think, proud and grateful that as we came together for the 2017 legislative session, that we, community college leaders at the CEO level with our trustees and inclusive of our faculty association, TCCTA, with Dr. Moore at the head, came together with one voice and one legislative agenda for the 2017 session. It meant that we not only came to the legislature in unison with a single set of recommendations, but it meant that while we carried different voices and different backgrounds in terms of providing that voices, it was a single voice. And I would tell you, I heard time and again from legislators and from legislative staff and from coordinating board staff here and other policy influencers that was a very meaningful approach that we took. And I'm grateful to our trustee colleagues. I'm grateful to our faculty colleagues at TCCTA and certainly TAC. I was very grateful to be a part of that. So that time and again, whether we dealt with micro issues or whether we dealt with macro issues such as funding, we all came in together in one space and made that request together. That carried its way all the way through special session. I remind people whenever I can that while special session by and large did not include higher education as defined through the lens of our four-year university colleagues, it absolutely included higher education for community colleges. We were busy, to say the least, during special session. We were active together with trustees. Roberto from Alamo College's trustee presented in both chambers eloquently about the need for us to be able to sustain the kind of resources and investments that we get locally to local ad valorem taxes. And we made, at least in one chamber, a very successful argument that community colleges not just serve their local communities admirably and have, therefore, a need for those resources, but that we also serve a compelling state interest. And so in the same way that the legislature rightfully exempted school districts from the statutory requirements of the rollback rates, we made an argument that community colleges also had sort of that same space. We, at the end of the day, have an educational core mission exclusively. And so at least in one of the chambers, that went well. And it went well in part because, again, trustees and our CEOs and our faculty colleagues came together and made that argument. So I share that with you as a way of saying this is the foundation on which we intend to build for the 2019 session, which then takes me to this important body and why we're here today. 2 weeks ago today, the coordinating board convened the first meeting of the Formula Advisory Committee for Technical and Community Colleges. TACC invited all of our colleagues who are a part of the Formula Advisory Committee to have lunch with us at the TACC offices just shortly before they met here at the coordinating board, in part because there are colleagues who wanted to have lunch and break bread with our colleagues, but also because we wanted to make sure that we work collaboratively with any of our colleges who are working with the coordinating board, Formula Advisory Committee specifically 2 weeks ago and now today with this important council, so that we are working hand in glove even as we begin to wrestle with the issues of the day that will inform the debates of 2019 and arguably the debates of 2021 in terms of the legislative session. And with that, let me say that this council will play an important role in that place. What I might, if I might, Chairman, ask in not just today's discussion, but the discussions to come after today's meeting, is invite this council to join us in unpacking some of the nuance in some of the policy issues while we have the time. On behalf of TACC, and I think with CAT as our trustee partners, we would like to be able to have some solution or conclusion on our 2019 legislative priorities by a year and a month, meaning October of 2018. And so that gives us about a 15-month window, a 14-month window a 13-month window to do some deep level of discussion on some of the policy issues, beginning with dual credit. Dual credit is not a conversation that will be new to anyone at the dais. Dual credit is not a conversation that is new to anyone in this building at the coordinating board, and certainly not at TACC and at CAT. And yet there are some conversations that are taking place and that will continue to take place over the course of the next 12 months that I think will be very important, so that we might be able to reach common ground, where there is common ground, between now and next October, so that we might be able to hands with our colleagues here at the coordinating board, perhaps, and certainly amongst our sister institutions at universities and our sister institutions at TSTC, where there is common ground, and come to the legislature in 2019 and seek a common solution for areas where we think there could be some good improvement to dual credit instruction, and certainly with regards to the availability of dual credit. I am of the opinion, and in some groups a minority opinion, in other groups a majority opinion, that there is ample room in this great state for an expansion of dual credit opportunities. That we have not yet, as a state, reached that saturation point at which more students, high school students that are eligible to take college courses are taking college courses. And so with the optimistic view that we might see an expansion, some organically, some structured, some by design, and policy facilitated, then I think the conversations of the next 12 to 13 months will help towards that end. I know that this body has heard already about the RAND study that is forthcoming on dual credit. That is one of several conversations that will inform in that space. And Chairman, I think at the appropriate time with the appropriate agenda, certainly we can go deeper into a dual credit discussion. Just yesterday, TACC co-hosted with our colleagues at the University of Texas System Office, the statewide task force that has been convening for the last 6 months on this space. We are hopeful that we will be able to produce an aggregated report on dual credit by the end of November of this year, and then that would then will begin an earnest conversation where we can find some policy solutions. Not all dual credit issues require policy solutions at the Capitol. Just to be clear, some of those will be institutional policies, some of those will be collaboration with the coordinating board and us with existing policies that exist, that we just need to make sure that we get the right framework. But in those instances, specifically, for example, in the area of funding, where there might be an opportunity for us to seek common ground, then we will be seeking input and advice and counsel from this body, as well as some other bodies, to make sure that we get it right. I think I'm at the end of my presentation, Chairman. Questions?
Well, I think we should accept the invitation to begin preparing for challenging 2019 session. As you well know, that was one of when the CAT board met in retreat, that was one of their goals and tasks, is to start preparing shortly after the 17 for the 19 session, and you certainly led us in those discussions. And if we don't give our input into dual credit, someone else will.
Correct.
So I think it's very important that takes place, and obviously funding is always an issue. So, any other questions or comments to? Okay, thank you, and we expect to be hearing from you.
Thank you, Chairman. And to your point, we've already started in 2019, and we will continue down that path, and we will invite the conversations on almost on a daily basis. Hopefully, we won't have Harvey. Actually, may I say something else on Harvey, Chairman? The Community College Association, alongside with many partners, state partners and local partners, have launched a campaign called Harvey Help that is specifically designed to raise capital to help our students who are returning to our colleges after the hurricane. We made a decision early on in the conversation of framing Harvey Help that this would not be explicit to community colleges, that this would be for all students attending our higher education institutions, inclusive of students who are residents of the affected areas, but who will be enrolling outside of that area. So I wanted to say that as a plug to Harvey Help, but more importantly, as a way of saying this is how we come together and continue to come together as one system of higher education, not as multiple sectors. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, and if I may have 15 seconds, I want to personally thank Ricardo Solis and Laredo Community College. For 2 weekends in a row, they brought down 18 wheelers full of goods for our students at Victoria College and our campus, so thank you very much. Next is going to be a discussion of House Bill 2223. It's going to be presented by Kristen Kramer, who is the Deputy Assistant Commissioner and Deputy Assistant for College Readiness and Success Initiatives.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Walker and members. I've asked Suzanne Morales-Vail, the Director of Developmental and Adult Education, to join me up here, and she's coming, to walk through the details of the legislation. Let me first thank Jacob for his kind words. We've staff in the Division of College Readiness and Success have reached out to TAC as well as Dana Center over multiple occasions since both the development and passage of HB 2223, because we thought it very important that we sort of row the same direction in the work in implementing this bill. I should say we want to be very thoughtful about how the rules are rolled out, as well as any assistance that staff can give the colleges on implementing the finer points. So my colleague Suzanne Morales-Vail organized a conference this summer, in fact, shortly after passage, to more deeply discuss co-requisite models and how to think about implementing them, bringing folks from the field to talk about what they've been doing and experimenting with on their campuses. In fact, we had many of your, thank you, many of your campuses represented at that conference. So thank you for sending them. Just a brief overview. I wanted to point out that, just for the record, that House Bill 2223, of course, emerged from this last session, the 85th legislative session. It was introduced by Representative Giddings, and to be honest, it was seen as a sort of more agreeable option to DevEd reform being proposed by Representative White through his House Bill 417, which was a little bit more ambitious of a bill in that it removed DevEd funding entirely and deleted the section of statute defined as the Texas Success Initiative. So that would have been a much bigger change, needless to say. With Representative Giddings' bill being introduced, he agreed to support that bill in initial conversations. So we were given this alternative. I think that was sort of the main comments I wanted to make as introduction. I was going to let Suzanne really walk through the specifics, and at the end, if you all have some questions, she'll probably be best served, the best person to answer them.
So, specifically, House Bill 2223 requires that every institution develop and implement, as part of its developmental education coursework, a co-requisite model. And it also provides for a phase-in period, a 3-year phase-in period, starting with 25% in fall 2018, whereby any student enrolled in developmental education would then be required to participate in a co-requisite model. The co-requisite model, yeah, and you can see the phase-in here. A co-requisite model is basically defined as a model whereby the student enrolls directly into the freshman level, entry level course. Examples would be college algebra, English 1301, the basic composition and rhetoric, introduction to statistics and other courses. And the student also then co-enrolls in some sort of developmental education support. And that co-enrollment has to happen in the same subject matter and in the same semester. And if you look at the bottom of the slide there, you can see that this also provides a definition of a co-enrollment, whereby not only are the students enrolled in both at the same time within the same semester, it also ensures that the content is aligned and the learning outcomes, instruction, and other activities are aligned, with the anchor being the college credit course and the developmental ed component providing just-in-time support to students as they go through the learning outcomes and as they go through the course, the credit course. We are talking to institutions about various options, and you know, our purpose is not to prescribe exactly what those options will look like. And we also should note that requiring and offering co-requisite models has actually been in rule since spring 2015, and so almost all of our institutions, to a greater or lesser degree, have been either directly offering and enrolling students in co-requisite models, or they have been building their programs and readying for implementation, and to various degrees of participation of their students. We Yeah. So also, we recently, I should say last year, we had funding provided through a legislative rider where institutions could submit proposals for expanding, for enhancing and expanding their existing co-requisite models. And as Kristen noted in the conference that we offered this summer, those grantees were really the stars of the conference, and they provided specific information on how they enhanced their models and how they were implementing their models. And what was especially useful when we got the feedback from participants was that while information on how co-requisites are employed nationally and in other states, the real value was that these were institutions that were employing, using Texas rules, Texas students, Texas statutes, and Texas reporting methodologies and so forth. So the descriptions and the processes that the institutions went through spoke to the language of the participants, and they were really, I think they really valued that so many of their colleagues were already employing these models, all of them to a great degree of success, which is something we hope they will continue to build on. Yes. So getting back to the phase-in periods, you can see here 25% would be effective this coming fall, and then the following fall that needs to bump up to 50%, and then 2020-21 year should be 75%. We are providing some guidance to institutions. There are existing rules that address this. As I said, this is not new to institutions, and so we are building on those existing rules, but we also find that there are other areas that need to be addressed in terms of how do we address students who are exempt, how are those students identified, and how those students would not be part of the denominator, if you will, when institutions determine what that 25% means for their institution. And so, we based on the statute, the language in the statute, students assessing at certain levels on the TSIA, those students who are actually served through adult education and literacy or adult education programs, and other what we call sort of non-credit programs such as continuing education, and those would be exempt, and we are providing guidance and working on language so that institutions can appropriately address the students who would be part of their denominator, if you will. So it does apply to underprepared students who are enrolled in developmental education coursework who don't qualify for the exemption as previously noted. And that includes any students who took the TSI assessment, which is the statewide required assessment for determining college readiness, and did not meet the college readiness benchmark, but were directed to a certain diagnostic, which more or less determines that they are on the upper echelon of the range of knowledge and skills required to be successful, and specifically also those students who are identified as assessing at levels 5 and 6 on a 1 to 6 scale. So some additional changes also. The entire Success Initiative, which was traditionally housed in Section 513062, has been moved, and a new Section F1 has been created. More or less, the language has just been moved, and I have to say, I think this was a definite benefit because now everything is in one place and it's much more logical. I think we heard feedback from institutions, and I think they definitely agreed that that part of the bill was certainly welcome. And then another component of the bill is that it also reduced eligible funding for developmental-led interventions and courses. Currently, or prior to the statute, the community and technical colleges were allowed up to 27 contact hours per student for funded developmental education. That has been reduced to 18. And universities previously were allowed up to 18, and that's been reduced to 9. There was a caveat provided for students who are enrolled in English as a second, English for speakers of other languages, ESOL, also commonly known as ESL coursework, which is outlined in the Academic Course Guide Manual, and that remains at 27 hours at community colleges and 18 at universities. And our colleagues in strategic planning and funding are working on specific rule language so that institutions are able to employ that component of the statute.
Actually, the revised rules, I think, should be posted any day now for the DE hours, and which are available for funding. I believe that an original set of rules were posted, and the consensus feedback was that there was still some confusion as far as the wording, and so our colleagues in strategic planning and funding pulled those rules and have resubmitted what they think may be clearer language. So those should be any day now, I believe.
Okay, well, so.
So we are, as noted earlier, we're working with TAC and other stakeholders to think about, as well as our colleagues throughout the agency, and really thinking about how to provide clarifying language in the rules as directed by statute, and as well to think about how we can better and more directly support you all in the implementation of this new statute. We are planning to have, or we hope to have, a good set of rules. Well, we will have a good set of rules out in time for implementation by next fall, but we are certainly having conversations now as far as how and what exactly those rules are going to look like in their final version. We still have more conversations to have, but I think we will be getting close, and we will certainly keep you apprised as we move along in this process. Oh, and please let me know if there are any questions.
Chairman, not a question, just a statement. So I certainly understand for next fall. Enrollment for next fall begins at most institutions in March or April. So I would imagine we'll have them ready by then.
Yes, and I think too, really what we're seeing, what we will be seeing in the rules isn't going to diverge from what's in statute. It would be perhaps some more specificity in the kinds of programming, but we've also been talking about that, I would say, since co-requisite has appeared in rule several years ago. So my expectation is that I can't imagine that rule would be especially provocative versus the statute. The main question is really around, seems to be the consideration of reporting, and that is something that we are working with your institutions and with our colleagues in data collection to iron out. So.
No more questions or comments. Thank you very much. Next is going to be a discussion of the regional targets for 60 by 30 TS. And if Jenna could approach, there she is. She's the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Strategic Planning. We have, thank you, we did receive some of your slides in your presentation. And
Good afternoon. I know that it is very near 1 o'clock, so I will try to keep my comments brief, but do want to convey, although brief, my enthusiasm for this work, and if there's anything you want to talk about afterwards, I'd be happy to discuss at more length. So what I'm going to be talking about now are the regional targets that we're promoting as part of the 60 by 30 TEX strategic plan. So this work really took off after we got a kind of a chorus of folks saying, okay, we embrace 60 by 30 text through the legislative session. We heard lots of references to 60 by 30 text, kind of broad support for saying, yes, these are the issues that are really important for our state, creating an educated population, growing the number of completions that we have, addressing student debt, addressing marketable skills. We're headed in the right direction. But what role should I be playing? How do I involve people outside of institutions of higher education? How do I engage my K-12 partners, my business and industry partners? How do we start to really move work forward to help achieve our bold goals? So what we also observed is that some regions, in the El Paso region, in Northeast Texas and others, there were kind of regional efforts that started to happen organically to bring people together, bring that diverse group of stakeholders together to talk about 60 by 30 text goals. And that was something we wanted to encourage and have now formalized this into a process where we're putting out targets for regions, and we'll ask folks to be getting together and provide some information back to the agency about what they're going to commit to, what they're going to work towards related to the goals. So this these slides just kind of reference who is that broader kind of ecosystem that can help support 60 by 30 text, and we want to find a way to better engage and empower people to come together. We want to help translate the big goals that we've set out into something that's a little bit more actionable. We hear, okay, great, 550,000 completions. What's my part? What should I be doing? And so we want to provide a little more guidance, but not be overly prescriptive. So we think regional effort hits that mark. We know that regions and the institutions they're in are really different from one another. They have different labor markets. They have different mixes of institutions, different kind of high school to higher ed enrollment patterns. And we also know that within regions, students are most likely to stay within their region. There certainly is mobility across regions, but about 80% of Texas students stay within their region when they go into higher education. And we also think that institutions can improve their planning by thinking outside of just their own institution if they're thinking about the broader regional context. For instance, if I'm trying to grow my enrollment and I'm basically borrowing students from my neighboring institution, we really haven't raised all boats in the region. So we want to keep an eye on some of that. So we're really focused on not on all four of the goals. We really wanted to think about which goals under the plan are most applicable to kind of a regional setting. And those are the 60 by 30 educated population goal, the completion goal of 550,000 bachelor's, associates, certificates, and masters, and the 65% high school to higher education direct enrollment. The first and third particularly lend themselves to regional work because they actually can't be attributed to an individual institution. When we think about how educated the Austin area is, we don't attribute that to UT Austin, nor do we attribute it to ACC. We say, you know, this is a conglomeration of lots of institutions. People are coming in and out of these areas. So a regional approach really is more effective in this area in particular. What we're going to ask regions to do is to identify at least one powerful strategy in each of these three areas. What is it that your region wants to work on in order to help meet these goals? And then also to set numeric targets by institution just for that completion goal. Breeze through this a little bit more information I would provide about each of these, but wanted to just emphasize we think that this will foster local ownership and local creativity, but at the same time focus on state goals and try and hit that right mix of encouragement but not too prescriptive. We do know that there are going to be challenges with this approach. institutions don't always work together the way higher education regions are established. There may or may not be existing relationships across the whole region. So this is certainly something that we're going to have to support, and we'll be asking for your help in reaching out to maybe partners that you are in your close region, but also maybe a little bit beyond a 30-mile radius, for instance. What we have in the slides here, just quickly, are the actual targets, the preliminary targets that we are putting out for the 3 areas that I mentioned. What you'll see here is variation. So if you're just looking at this first slide, 2015 is the most recent actual data we have for where the attainment level in the 10 higher education regions. And then we have projections for in 5-year increments thereafter. So if you just look at 2030, for example, at the bottom, you'll see 60%. That's our big 60 by 30 goal. But the range is anywhere from 47% to 70% across the region. So this is really taking into account where a region's starting. We are looking for growth from all regions, but want to be cognizant of those differences in where people are starting. The next is completion. Again, you'll see the most recent actual data and then projections in 5-year increments. And you'll see, again, the range. Some of the large, highly populous regions have higher numbers. Some of our smaller regions with fewer students and fewer institutions, a little bit smaller, but again, adding up to our overall state goal of 550,000. And then finally, for the high school to higher education enrollment, by 2030, we're aiming for 65%, and you'll see a range there from about 61% to 71%. So the thing I did want to make sure you saw was just the rollout plan where we're going from here. We would like to roll this out with one region this fall. Initially, we had shared with the board that we were going to roll it out to everyone starting this fall. That seemed a little overly ambitious. We're going to take a step back, do a pilot for the fall, and then roll it out to all the other 9 regions starting in January. So we're working on some support materials and finalizing how that's all going to happen. So things to look forward to, and I really welcome your participation and engagement with this strategy coming forward. So, thank you.
Did you say which region was going to be the first one?
I did not say. I will be sure to let you know. We're talking to some folks and not quite ready to share.
And Jenna, in reaching the regional goals, did you drill down and put institutional goals as well?
We did not. So what we would like to do is put out this regional completion goal, and just for this one, ask institutions to self-identify and kind of negotiate within their region. If Upper East Texas is going to get to 20,000, what would individual institutions within that region need to contribute? So hopefully providing a little guidance without, again, getting to the detail of an institutional target. Thank you.
Well, thank you. There's more or less a standing agenda item, which is an update concerning issues related to transfer and how that kind of relates to the 20 by 30 TX. Rex, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I'll try to truncate my 45-minute prepared presentation into no, just kidding. Just a couple of quick comments about that. One is that we in particular for those of you that are new to this and may not be completely aware of our work with fields of study and also with programs of study. About 15 years ago, the coordinating board was tasked with developing 10 fields of study that are major specific, and those courses then are mandated by law to not only transfer but also to apply to that major at a 4-year institution. And this applies whether you go from a 2-year to a 2-year or from a 4-year to 4-year, by the way. And so they developed those 10, and then they just kind of sit there for a long time. And a couple of years ago, we sort of resurrected that movement, and in July, there were 4 new fields of study that were approved. We have several programs of study. Fields of study deal with 4-year degrees and the lower division courses required for a 4-year baccalaureate degree. Programs of study deal with 2-year degrees, as typically the Associate of Applied Science degrees, and how they can be better aligned across the state. So we've got 4 of those that recently passed, so there's a half a dozen or more that have been updated and are in play now. We have plans to start about 4 or 5 more of these in the fall. and we will continue to go. We're working with the top 25 majors, and those things that are brought to us by the field that people request that we do because they're particularly problematic in transfer, or sometimes just because they want to update Mexican American studies. Those folks came to us and said, we really want to update this field of study, so that has been accomplished, and so on. And I think what's important about this is that transfer became a very big issue in this last legislative session, particularly in the Senate. And there was some legislation passed in the Senate regarding transfer that ultimately did not get any traction in the House. But we have internally begun to discuss interim charges, and we've also begun to think about what our own legislative priorities will be in the next session. And so I personally would like to see, and will push internally as much as I can, for transfer to also be an item in the next go-around too. Students more and more are moved from one institution to another, and sometimes to another institution, attend more than one institution at a time. And so transfer is becoming more and more an issue, and it's not really the transfer issue, because if you passed it, it's going to transfer. What really matters is whether those courses are going to apply to a person's degree or not. And so we hope to continue to make that an issue and continue our work with fields of study and programs of study. And next time we meet, we'll try to do a little bit more robust presentation on it. But in the interest of time, I'll just leave it at that. I'll try to answer any questions you might have.
Yeah, with just the limited resources that four-year colleges and two-year colleges are facing, I just think that one area is cooperation between these institutions. And I think it can be done, particularly on a local level. And one of them is just what you're talking about, is the transfer and make sure the community college deals with their biggest source and have their counselors in at the four-year colleges when they register for the two-year colleges, so we know those will be accepted. So one of the things is to get best practices going, have other institutions make presentations on what's worked and what hasn't worked. So anyway, that's something along those lines I think would be good. I think the discussion of future agenda items and the meeting date, I think we all received notice that the next meeting date is November 29th.
Let me jump in there if I can, Ron. We need to discuss time. Maybe point to Bill over there coming from El Paso is apparently quite a distance. But what's the best time to have this meeting? And then there's also been a couple of comments about the leadership conference for the trustees and the presidents that we host each fall is scheduled to start November 30th at 8 o'clock in the morning. We had originally had this scheduled for that date, and we moved it to the 29th, which is a Wednesday. And for you, the new members here, we normally meet quarterly on Thursdays. That's what we have historically done. And so what's the best time to meet on the 29th? And I think there's a dual credit, the dual credit task force, I think, is meeting that morning on the 29th. And so does the 29th work for the majority? And the challenge is that we're right after Thanksgiving, and then, of course, right before the holidays, and there really is no other time in early winter to meet. We challenged either to have this room available or everybody's calendars, everybody's agenda. I don't know how busy y'all's calendars are. I don't know how busy my calendar is. So does the 29th work? Do we start at 10:30? Do we start at 11? Do we start at 1 o'clock in the afternoon?
29th is fine with me. I've blocked it on my calendar already, so, but if we need to move it 1 hour or so, one way or the other, won't matter to me.
Yeah, and for those who may be staying over for the 30th, maybe an afternoon 1 to 4 might be a little better.
1 to 4? Okay, we will do that.
Yeah, later if possible.
And just as a mention, I'll send an invite. I believe we've already reserved the next meeting for March 2nd, I believe. Rhonda, do you remember? I think that's right, but I'll send something. We try to keep this pushed out to you in advance.
Mr. Chairman, previously, when we discussed these times, I think the reason we decided to meet at 10 was because of the, I remember right, Southwest flights coming from Houston area here, and it was the return flight that was the problem.
Yeah.
Here to there, if you didn't get back to the airport by 3 o'clock or something like that, so.
Well,
You may want to consider, if you meet from 1 to 4, then somebody's got to spend the night. So.
Well, and I think the challenge with the Southwest flights out of Houston were generally George and Marie, and so we have Mr. Cantini from Galveston and Dan. So I guess y'all can wait. Well, yeah, you're flying by down there as well. So I mean, y'all know the flight schedule. I don't. You know, so I mean, it's. That's why we're discussing it. And does 1 to 4 work? Does, 10 to 1 works for many. It didn't work for a couple this morning. And even I think 10:30 was challenging for maybe. But anyway, so that's why we're talking about it. Y'all tell us. And is 1 to 4 consensus? No, we're just talking about the 29th. But
Because the 30th is, right?
do it, yes, instead of the instead of the 30th.
For this time only, right?
Yeah, and then on the March 2nd meeting, which I'm pretty sure it's that date, I'll have to look and see if that's a state holiday. Okay, maybe, I'll look at that. I shouldn't try to do it off the top of my head, but anyway. But if that's the Thursday, that's probably when we set up the meeting. But I'll check, I'll send that to you. But that meeting, we will tentatively schedule for the 10:30 to 1 format, unless there's consensus of another format. But so the 29th only, we're going to schedule for 1 to 4. Okay.
The agenda says that there's discussion of future agenda items. Does anyone have any comments on that?
And maybe just a comment, especially with the number of new folks, if you have things you want to discuss and be brought to the council, email me, let me know, call me, whatever. And the agenda item is normally a collaborative, collective kind of effort. And so, your feedback, we try to take the topics that we think are current and relevant. And so just let us know.
Is there any other comments, questions? Yes.
Yes, I would like to, since you asked about future topics, for me, in my community, the biggest question that keeps on coming up is on the dual credits. And I would like to constantly have the latest and update and better understanding and data of what's going to happen. That seems to be one that's reoccurring from my trustees to the ISDs everywhere. I think everybody feels the same way, and it seems to be pressing.
No other comments? We are adjourned.